Sorry, I did speak rather fast.
No, it just means that obviously we can capture everything that you say because I can't possibly remember it all. So
yes,
anyway,
I am quite passionate
we are recording it now. But yes, it sounds similar situation. And also, Catherine, interesting that you are an outstanding school, and what the impact of that might be. I mean, I don't know if it will have an impact on Ofsted ratings. Obviously not straight away,
well,
but in the future.
Told not, but yeah.
Yeah, okay. Good stuff. Thank you, Catherine. Obviously, we will come back to talk about this very shortly. But let's move on next to Danny, if you could introduce yourself, Danny.
Good evening. I'm a head teacher at the Tooth Elementary Primary School in the Midlands. We are an outstanding school. We have a demographic that Ofsted would classify as being either broadly in line or slightly below, depending on the cohort, and they are well below in terms of social skills. And we have ever-increasing disadvantaged pupil premium numbers and quite significant EAL numbers as well. We're in the local authority of Sandwell, and if you know Sandwell, it's one of the poorest authorities in Europe, so it gives you a kind of idea of our intake. SATS results went really well. The school has become a teaching alliance and been working with some really innovative approaches for the last couple of years. We actually ended up taking the Key Stage 1 SATS tests for maths early as part of the sampling, and are moderated there as well. And the kind of Singapore maths-based approaches and things that we're using now have prepared the children immensely well for the changes, and really the test changes didn't make much of a difference. The only thing really that had a more significant test on the pupils was the reading, but there was only kind of one child that missed out that we would have really liked to have got it, but she didn't complete the paper. I think really we would have probably missed a few more, but I think the floor standard was a bit lower, and I think the national average brought it down. So I think that kind of kept us in really good measure, but at this stage we seem to be in a pretty strong position.
Good. Well, it is nice, Danny, to hear sort of a positive story this evening as well. And it would be really interesting during this evening's discussion. You said, you felt that as a result of what you'd implemented in school, your pupils were really well prepared for the SATs. And so it would be really interesting to hear, what you did to prepare them, maybe what resources you were using, and how that contributed to that good result. So we'll come back to it, Danny. Thank you. Let's move on next to Jamie, if you could introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Jamie. I'm a head teacher, Tooth Elementary Church School in Hertfordshire. Generally quite affluent area. We could wax lyrical about the SATS results, I suppose, for quite a long time, and I very much agree with the comments that my colleagues have already made. For me, I think one of the most concerning issues is going to pertain to the teacher assessment for writing, because that's come out as higher than everything else, and I think the government's going to start using that as a stick to beat schools with, that we're over-inflating scores. Within that, it would be interesting to see the variation that occurs across the country. Within my own cluster of schools, as head teachers, we met yesterday to have discussions about the results and what that was going to come out in our area. And there were some schools that had submitted teacher assessment for age-related at 35%, and other schools in the same area at 80%. Whether they'd been factors as to whether they'd been moderated or not were quite key factors here, and I think I'll leave it at that for the time being.
Yeah, interesting that you say you picked up on that, Jamie, because writing assessment is one of the areas for this evening's discussion, and I think that that's quite pertinent there, looking there at, as you say, the 74% of pupils, well, that's the highest of all the areas. Really, really interesting. We will come back to it, so good stuff. Let's move on next to Maria.
Oh, hi. I've recently moved to a very small school in Staffordshire. We've literally only got 4 classes, so we've got mixed classes as well. So we were moderated for obviously our Key Stage 1 SATs and our Key Stage 2 SATs. Because the school is in the top 8% in the county, we had to do the maths SATs early as well. I'd literally only been there 2 days as assistant head, so that was a bit of a shock to the system.
Yeah.
So, in all fairness, coming from a small school, you always think that you've not prepared your children well enough, and our SATS results we thought were going to be awful this year because we've had a high turnover of staff, even though we've only got 4 classes. But because of the moderation and the assessment, everything that everybody had put in, we've actually not done too badly towards the floor targets, and because we've been moderated as well. You still feel that you've let the children down, and it's still going to be very difficult to explain to the parents that a small percentage of their children failed.
Yeah, that's it. It's the reporting as well back to parents.
That's the big thing for us, because with it being such a small school, everybody knows everybody as well. It's very difficult, and we were happy that we were moderated because then at least our judgments, are sound and secure.
Yeah.
What that holds for next year, I'd hate to say.
Well, yes, and of course, naturally, our clients listening in are very, very interested in, kind of the what next and thinking ahead now to next year. So, yes, that's very, very good point there, Maria, thinking what about next year now. Okay, moving on next to Phil, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Phil. I'm Executive Principal across 2 3-form entry schools in Manchester. So both massive schools. One's got 702 on roll, one has 690. Predominantly EAL in one of the schools, about 60% EAL in the other. High free school meals across both. One being in sort of one of the most deprived wards in Greater Manchester, the other one not being far off. It's been very difficult, I think, with the SATs this year. We'd have got a rising sort of trend in the previous regime, as it were, and we were combined at 80% in one school and 75% last year. Our combined this year is looking like being more like in the late 30s in one, and even possibly in the 20s in the other. I'm seeing senior staff tomorrow is going to go through it line by line. Reading was quite tough for some of our children with that EAL background, I think. A lot of language that they hadn't necessarily come across before. And, we, particularly one of the schools, it's an outstanding staff team there who are delivering, really, really good teaching and learning. Both schools graded good in 2014 by Ofsted, and I would say in one case moving on towards that outstanding grading. And yet, I think we'll be quite, knocked back by these results.
Yeah.
To some extent. Key Stage 1 results were better, in comparison, although our writing was quite low at Key Stage 1, and that was with external moderation, and again, this sort of line by line going through, if you haven't got it in everything, then you can't give it as meeting age-related expectations.
Yeah.
So that was quite tough if you compare it with the previous sort of more best fit approach. And we're showing sort of good results in other areas. So good level of development coming out of early years is on the up in both schools and has been for 2 or 3 years. Our phonics scores in year 1 were the highest they've ever been in both schools. So it does make you kind of think, the problem isn't the teaching.
Yeah.
It's the change system. Now, I think if people understand it's a completely new system and not to make comparisons with the previous system, then that's fine. But I don't think that's been made clear enough to the general public. And so there's a lot of expectation management, I think, that needs to be done.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I was just reading through various articles before this evening's session saying just that, Phil, that it's not really comparable in the sense that, you're assessing against different standards, but I think I picked up the figure. It's a drop from 80% achieving the required standard last year in all areas to 53% this year. And obviously, when you look at it like that, it doesn't feel that good. But obviously, we must try not to compare, I guess.
But that combined score is 12% below the government's own floor target, as I also alluded to, which makes you think that something's gone wrong there, doesn't it? Either the floor target was completely wrong, or the government's understanding of its own assessment was completely wrong. Yeah, absolutely. Interesting stuff, which we'll come back to. Thank you, Phil. Finally, Vera, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hello, I'm Vera. I'm head of school in a 1-form entry primary school in central London. We've got about just under 50% pupil premium, very international mix, highly diverse, no sort of significant one group of particular nationality. Regarding the Key Stage 2 test, we've done okay, so we're pretty happy with the results, and I'm surprised that some children getting it that we wouldn't have expected. It was tough. We did a lot of preparation in advance of that, and I would agree as well with the other person that said about, particularly EAL children, and that reading test was a great challenge.
Yeah. Okay. Lovely, thank you, Vera. Sorry, Vera, do you have anything to add there?
Regarding Ofsted, we've just had Ofsted this term,
right?
And we're good. We can't be outstanding because attendance is the one thing that
it holds you back.
Got to work on, basically.
Lovely, thank you. It sounds like you've got a real mix this evening, and definitely got quite a variety of results in the Year 6 stats, which should hopefully make for a nice, lively discussion. So, just continuing really that conversation about what you made of the tests, and we are interested in knowing what you made of the tests, as well as, of course, the results from them, which you're still digesting, really. I mean, were there, and Joe's put the question there in the chat pod, were there any aspects of the Key Stage 2 tests that were more or less challenging than expected and then in previous years? I'm going to come to you, Vera, because you said reading there. I mean, what was it about the reading test that was, I'm assuming you mean it was more challenging?
Yeah, I mean, on initial thoughts, when I was looking at it and the children were actually doing it, I was thinking, okay, this is a proper reading test. This really can test where the children can read independently and assimilate the information. And I thought, yeah, this is a real challenge. There was no questions where you could just get a few marks because you could kind of dip into the text and find a few facts. Everything was based on really reading the complete piece and really understanding it. So it's a very good test of, can children read to an ability that they should be able to?
Yeah.
But in some ways, for those children who are not so good at reading, or EAL children, dyslexic children, it was a challenge. And I know that was the one test lots of people were saying on social media, etc.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that was difficult.
Yeah. So thinking ahead then to how you might address that in the forthcoming year. I mean, I know it's still early days, but is there anything off the top of your mind that you could or might do differently to prepare your pupils for the test next year, and particularly those pupils with SEN or EAL who really did struggle with it? What could the school implement or do to sort of make it a little bit easier for the children?
I mean, we have been talking about it, and there's various things that have been kind of floated as to whether or not the guided reading, should we have more guided reading, so therefore more opportunities, or actually is guided reading in Year 6 not working as well? Would we be better to have more whole class input into reading? So I think we're not quite sure. We're aware that we almost need to do something different, but we're not quite sure exactly what it is that will work for us.
Yeah, they're really interesting, and it certainly sounds like you of course, will be putting a lot of thought into that area in particular over the next few months. So I'm just going to come to Maria, because you said as well the reading had some children, they really struggled with it. So could you maybe elaborate on that, Maria, and also...
One of the heads of our local school, because obviously... You feel quite insular when, you're quite small and everyone gets together, and there were some very, very able, one of our outstanding local schools, some very, very able children who were completely flawed, and children who you would have thought had all the language and all the skills, really found it quite bizarrely difficult. Children that you thought, oh yeah, this is a breeze, their languages, they're fairly eloquent, they've got all of that. Their inference is absolutely fine, and some of them found it really quite bizarrely difficult.
So Maria, was that due maybe to the format, the style of the questions, the style of the test, which maybe the children weren't used to?
I mean, I think the head is still completely, as I say, at a loss, because they've been outstanding. This is their third outstanding
Yeah.
So we look to them, as a shoulder and a mirror and a way through. But, actually, to be fair, our results, we've outshadowed them this year. And we have a very small cohort because we've got mixed age classes.
Yeah.
So we look to them to make sure that we're doing the right thing, we're preparing our children, and we've actually whooped them this year. So obviously, our Year 6 teacher was doing the right stuff. I think she's going more towards, as you said, guided reading, but with specific. We've got a bigger intake this year, so more guided reading sessions with some of the children who are perhaps not, that eloquent, that confident, and as you said, class readers with the children. But then we have the support staff, so we can do that.
Yes. Yeah, interesting. And moving on to Danny, just because you've highlighted reading as more challenging as well. So I can see you've put a few comments there in the chat pod, Danny. But perhaps you could just elaborate on the aspects of the reading tests that were more challenging, and also what you might implement as a school in order to prepare for that in the forthcoming year.
I think I echo some of the comments that have already been made, and that it was a proper reading test. I think, in essence, past the first text, it was just a reading test. I think the first text was a significantly more complex piece, and the questions had, difficult language for some, and you had to work a lot harder. There were no give me marks, which is natural in terms of the increase in standards. I think for us, we've made some big changes over the last couple of years. We were very, very fortunate, and I appreciate that. I'm speaking about my context alone, and we've had some good support, so I don't want to kind of appear that, we have all the answers. We are very aware that we know we've been lucky, but we got to work with the University of California in San Diego and looking at how they support English as additional language, and they have some really quite profound language and reading comprehension approaches, and basically we came back and said, listen, reading comprehension and guided reading as it stands in this country is a dying art, and it's useless. It needs to change, it needs to be focused, it needs to be practical, it needs to have what are called DARTs, direct activities related to texts. It needs to be securing the learning rather than just a conversation sat around a table about books. It needs to really give the children the ability to secure the learning as actual learnt material that they can apply later on. And some of those have been whole class sessions as well. And I think for us, it's a sense of making sure that is now feeding up from early years into Year 6, that it's not patchy, but it is continuous. And I think if it does, it will continue to work, and it's been showing good signs, but it's by no means secure, and we're learning as we go. So I think if we do keep pushing for it, it will pay off.
Interesting. Thank you, Danny. A couple of you have actually mentioned guided reading. So, in fact, I'm just going to do a quick poll on whether you are going to carry on with guided reading next year. So bear with me just a moment, because I'm just typing it out now. Right.
Can I just chip in on the reading test?
Hi, Phil.
Hi. I read somewhere that looked at the content of this year's reading test, and that you needed to have a reading age of 15 to access all the language and the nuance of that, which obviously, we do have readers who read at that age group, but not very many. And I think the difficulty with students, and our students all come in 100% below or well below national expectations, are not reading in English at all at home, and therefore there's an upward battle there to get those students to that sort of position, and we're very aspirational for them, but as sort of seen in the previous results in the 2 years before. And we've done a lot of work on reading, on sort of adapting the guided reading approach to suit our pupils, a lot of work on love of reading, ensuring that high quality texts are being used in all teaching, vocab through experience, because we found it's very difficult for our pupils to talk about places they've never been to, and so we've got targeted work around trips, so that there's real vocab emphasis when you go away on trips. So if you're going to the seaside, you do a lot of work on the language around the seaside beforehand, you link that to the body text, etc. So there's a lot of work that we were doing that has built up and pupils' reading confidence was much higher, their inference skills were much better, but yet they really struggled with this test. I think part of it was because it was, as others have alluded to, there were no easy marks, and so therefore the first question you had was quite a hard question. Quite a lot of people didn't get the first question right, and therefore, you're then sort of in that sort of knocks confidence, if you like, within the first question. I don't understand that. I don't know the answer to that. Rather than easing away into the test, and I don't think I don't think tests should be easy by any stretch of the imagination. But I think also we have to take account of the range of pupils that are taking them.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that was done this year.
Really, really interesting. Thank you, Phil. I'm just going to put that poll on screen. I did it very quickly, so apologies if any of the answer options aren't relevant to you, then just let us know in the chat pod, because it was a very quick one that I did there. Let me just have a look, though, at what you have been saying in the chat pod, because I don't want to miss anything out. Catherine, can I come to you? But just because I've noticed that you said a bit about writing, which I do want to come to, but also, you're saying there about finding a spelling resource. I mean,
yes, well, that was what let us down when we were moderated on our writing. It was our spelling, and we haven't really found something that's going to help us.
Right.
I mean, we might teach the spelling list, but they're looking at a level of spelling in all their writing, not just using those spelling lists. I mean, if anyone can suggest any good resources, I see there it says Rising Stars, but you're not quite sure whether it's effective enough. If anyone's got anything, I would love to know.
Well, there's the two. I mean, we've got a whole school at the moment, Ruth Miskin Phonics, and they're built on top of a spelling book, which is heavily adapted to suit us. And then on top of that, another good one that a lot of our school-to-school support, one's usually called No Nonsense Grammar, No Nonsense Spelling.
No nonsense spelling, right.
Yeah,
I haven't heard of that one.
No, they're pretty low-key, but they're based on pretty sound theory. And having some good outcomes.
Right, and the Ruth Miskin is it called?
That's Ruth Miskin is our Read Write Inc. That's her phonics scheme, but because we've had that embedded across school and adapted it, the spelling sits on top of that and links towards it, so I don't know if
and you can use that in Year 6?
You can use that from Year 2 upwards, so it's a whole school approach, really.
Okay.
And that's why I really like it, because it pushes in, but No Nonsense might be more of a dip in.
Yes, thank you. I'll look at that. Thank
you. Wonderful. Okay, I just want to have a further check at the chat pod. I don't want to miss anything. Good. Okay, I think we'll move on. If there are any further aspects that we've not discussed over the phone that were more or even less challenging than you expected in the SATs, and you're thinking about how you might address those challenges in the forthcoming year, in the next few months, let us know, because we would be really interested in hearing. And if you are going to be turning to online resources, commercial resources, creating things yourselves, looking for additional training, then that would be really good to know. And we'll, myself and Joe will pick up on that. So we will come to it. I just want to ask briefly, though, as well, about obviously that there are these. There's the proposed multiplication test for Year 6, which is intended for launch in 2017. I'm thinking about sort of planning for that and resourcing for that. Just a general question out to everybody. Will the school require any new resources in order to prepare children for that Year 6 multiplication test that is going to be coming in next year?
We were actually a test school on that, and it worked quite well, actually. So I would favour that one, and we have got the resources for it. If it was not the whole class at once, we can manage. So yes, we did actually try it out.
Catherine, I'm really interested because you have tried it out then. Yes. How did it work? Talk us through.
It worked very well. It didn't take very long, so each child only needed to be on the computer for about 10 minutes or so.
Right.
It was quite quick. Yeah. And they enjoyed it because they preferred doing it actually on the screen than on paper. And they enjoyed it because it's a bit like mathematics which we use anyway. And they enjoyed it and they did well on it.
Okay, interesting. That's really useful feedback. So it certainly sounds like you managed to. I mean, do you have enough computers for one per child, or did you sort of have to rotate it?
We've got 16 in our suite, but actually, when a lady came to actually do it from the NFER, and she just took 3 at a time. and they just sat on, and it didn't take very long.
No.
So a teaching assistant could do that quite easily.
No.
And it was all very well explained for them on screen anyway, so they only
Yeah.
had to sit there for 10 minutes each.
Yeah.
So it was quite easy to administer.
Interesting. Thank you, Catherine. It's good to actually get feedback from somebody who has actually had a go with it. But out to the rest of the group, I mean, does anybody have any concerns about that multiplication test, either in terms of, you know, the knowledge and ability of all children, including those with SEN or EAL, but also in terms of the ability of your technology to actually cope with the testing? Anybody got any comments to make there? No?
It would be nice if in September we're clear exactly what the test will look like.
Yeah.
Because obviously one of the biggest issues were, you know, we didn't get the interim statements till well after Christmas, and you're not sure what the goalposts are in September.
Yeah.
It's like being absolutely clear this is exactly what it's going to look like, and people can plan then.
I'm going to hedge my bets. I'm going to hedge my bets and guess that they won't be ready for September, and even if they do say we are getting some, they will be late anyway, like everything else is.
Mm-hmm.
I think really it's a case of finding your own path. We have a set of 16 iPads that we share across the whole school, but we've got some absolutely phenomenal apps and things on there now that develop really quick recall and firing grammar and multiplication and math facts, and I mean, with the generations that we've got coming through of children and their ability to use technology, I think things like the multiplication test don't faze us as much.
No.
I think it just saddens us that they have brought a test like that in, because a lot of the maths paper was actually quite a good paper. It's based on some good questioning, questions that gave children multiple different routes to get to the answer. So it was tougher, but it gave children opportunities. I think the DFE spent a long time convincing us to move towards mastery. It was a good idea. It's based on sound fundamentals, but this kind of undermines the entire approach, because multiplication and random recall is a low level of actual thinking. So it kind of seems a bit negate and unnecessary, really.
Yeah, thank you, Danny. Danny, I saw in the chat pod there, so you said apps and online resources. If there are any particular apps, I might be putting you on the spot, but if there are any that you can remember off the top of your head, or online resources that you feel might be useful for that multiplication test practice, then let us know in the chat pod, and that would be really interesting feedback. Andy, I'm going to come to you, because you said you'll be hunting for resources. Do you think that will be more of a priority for you then?
Yeah, I mean, I personally won't be, but my staff will be. Yeah, well, certainly with the threat of, what is it, if you don't get 100% 3 years in a row, then head teachers will be sacked.
Oh, I've not heard that. I certainly hope not. But okay. I mean, will you be willing to pay for sort of commercially provided resources, or will you be looking for things available sort of free of charge? Have you budgeted for that?
I mean, I can't imagine that the kind of resources for this are going to be very expensive. So no, at the moment I'm not concerned. No, we'll be able to afford those.
Yeah. Okay. And Catherine, there, you're saying mathematics is
Yes.
also an obvious one. Do they have sort of?
Yes,
I
they
know
have
it's all
quick
in
fire
practice,
timetables, which was all it was when we did the pilot. That's all it was. It was just quick fire on timetables.
Okay.
Straightforward.
Great. I will sadly move the conversation on a little bit. I could talk about SATs and things all day long, because you've got loads to say on it. But I will move on. But in the meantime, if there are any further thoughts and comments either about the SATs or the multiplication test, then let us know via the chat. I want to move on actually to talking about the reception baseline, because it is a bit of a U-turn really in government policy. It's not now compulsory to be doing that baseline test. And I've got a poll actually, so I'm going to bring that on screen. Let me find it. There we go. Just gauging, how much you agree really with the removal of that reception baseline. Get your thoughts on it. So I'll give you a moment just to complete that poll. And I'm actually going to put on another poll in the meantime as well. hide that. So I'm going to put poll 2 on as well. So here we go. So of course you can still opt in to do the baseline, albeit not compulsory. So let us know as well if you will be opting in to do it, regardless of the fact that you don't have to. And I'll share the results with you. Okay, so it looks like from the votes so far, we've got a real mix actually of opinion about how much you agree with the removal of the reception baseline. So I'm going to come to both sides. So to start off with, if I come to Phil, so you said you strongly agree with the removal of that baseline. Can you talk us through your thoughts?
Not the principle of a baseline in some senses, just because it was chaotic with I don't know how many different ways there were of doing it, but certainly my two schools, I was running one of them when it came in and not the other, and they took the two different, there were two different methodologies, two different bought-in ones that they used, and they were so disparate in terms of the outcomes that it was kind of, you didn't know which to believe almost in terms of the usefulness, and so I can see where they kind of went, that first set of results almost isn't valid because there was such a difference between what was reported. It depends what the sort of overall approach is as well. I mentioned in the chat room earlier about how we're measuring progress going forward, because for the kind of schools that I'm running, progress is massively important. Our pupils in certain subjects, we were in the top 1% nationally for writing progress 2 years ago, and actually on the old methodology would have been similar again this year, because 100% of our pupils were making 2 levels progress, 70% were making 3 levels progress and more. Now, how are we measuring that going forward? And if we can't measure it on the current system because there's no tie-up between the current Year 6 SATs and obviously the assessments that those children took in Year 2 or in reception. So I think there's a merit to trying to have a reception baseline that then gives that progress across primary school measure.
Yeah.
But it wasn't very well applied, and therefore I think that's why it's right to have removed it this year in the sense it was set up. I think it would have been better, rather than giving options, to have settled on one methodology.
Yeah. So, going on from what you said there then, how are you going to be measuring progress then? Where will the baseline be if, in the absence of using the actual reception baseline? How are you going to be measuring that progress across the primary spectrum?
So we're doing two things. We're continuing to use learning journeys, etc., to get to a good level of development measure at the end of reception. And obviously you can use that for the relevant age group at the end of nursery as well, because we have 60-place nursery on both of our sites. We're also using ASQ's Age Stages questionnaire, which is used by midwives and health visitors preschool. And there's a 3-year-old version of that and a 4-year-old version of that we're using in nursery reception, which gives us a sort of more information about people's skills and where they're at in terms of their age-related expectations, really. But there isn't a clear marry-up, other than the good level of development is kind of equated to being ready for the national curriculum and therefore sort of a 1C almost in the old money. And there isn't a marry-up then going forward, so it'll be interesting to see if there's any direction on that.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Thank you. Let me have a look back at the poll as well. So, Jamie, coming to you then. So you sort of disagree with this scrapping of the reception baseline. Can you talk us through your thoughts, really?
Well, I don't think that, even from what Phil was saying, I don't think that anyone disagreed with the actual principle of it.
Yeah.
The idea of measuring progress seems to make more sense to do it from when a child first arrives at the school rather than a year into the time that the child's at the school.
Yeah.
I completely agree with what Phil said. Having multiple formats for the baseline test was just a joke. I'm not quite sure why anyone in government ever thought that was going to be a good idea. There should have been one format. We used the Expa. It was very much recommended to us and tied very much to the early years stepping stones. And it was a very useful exercise once the early years goals had been, when we've done our own baseline, and then we'd done the government baseline. So again, that was a little bit crazy really, but it was quite a useful exercise to see the overlap and the disagreement between the traditional way of doing the baseline and the Expa baseline, and that proved to be quite an interesting discussion in able to get a more accurate assessment of where children first were. So from that point of view, I found it quite a useful exercise. In discussions with my EYFS leader later in the year, we decided that they would fill in the stepping stone early learning goals, sorry, not early learning goals, the stepping stones first, and then use that to help fill in the Expa form. So we were pretty much set up ready to go again for next year, which is, I still think the principle of it's quite good. I just think the handling of it's been awful.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Has anybody got anything further to add there on top of what Jamie's said?
No, I totally agree with them. Yeah, we need something, but not what we had.
I mean,
and how it's used as well.
Yeah, Danny.
Yeah, we're moving forward the triangulation approach, so it echoes the same sentiment. I think we're all on the same page. Is that giving a random choice without having actually kind of properly aligned them was just absolutely nuts. I think from our point of view, we've been baselining for years, but we like the idea of using a baseline assessment as well as observations and targeted observations to triangulate our own judgments, and those judgments can feed in towards year 1, year 2, and be used for progress measures. But otherwise, in terms of an external one that's not very well thought out, not very well tracked, not very well processed, and not tested across a number of schools, and then them enforcing the tracking, it was just the worst idea. Everyone was proving that anyway. So I think we will be carrying on, but it'll be in our own way, and the triangulation approach will work, and it will allow us to track progress measures.
Yeah, great, thank you. Joe's just put a question there in the chat pod. So, what you are planning to do, if obviously if you're not using the current baseline assessment format, if you could all just summarise in the chat pod what you are planning to do in the way of testing what your assessment arrangements will be in reception moving forwards now, that would be really good. So I'm just going to give you a moment to just sort of summarise what you will be doing there in the chat pod so that we can capture that information. And I'm just going to grab a quick sip of water whilst you're doing that. So, Catherine, you're just going to wait and see really what your local authority...
They gave us very clear guidance before. We'll probably use the early excellence, but now we'll follow what they say. They're usually quite sensible. And we do moderate those schools in the area who also follow the early excellence.
Yeah. Good. So, I just realised my my keyboard's on caps lock, so I'm typing away, looking like I'm shouting at somebody. Right. Well, and my next question was going to sort of be asking you: are you changing anything in terms of your Key Stage 1 assessments as a result of the changes to the scrapping of the reception baseline? Does anybody think this is going to have an impact on assessment at Key Stage 1, or is it just going to be very much business as usual?
I think business as usual.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, the impact on Key Stage 1 is more likely to be from the new Key Stage 1 test.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a more top-down pressure of what the pupils expected to know by the end of year 2, and therefore adapting our planning and teaching methodologies to get them ready for that.
Great. Okay. Lovely. So moving on then to talking a little bit about end-of-year assessments, and whilst we are moving on, then of course there may be some extra stuff from Joe just filtering into the chat pod there, but just want to ask you a little bit about end-of-year assessments and just really have a quick recap on your assessment policies. So how often and how do you conduct assessments across both Key Stages 1 and 2? And just picking up on what you said, Danny, so I know you've mentioned there about that triangulation approach, the idea of gathering information from a variety of different sources. So I will come to you first, Danny. I mean, in terms of end-of-year assessment and stuff, do you do any sort of formal testing at the end of the year, to sort of, obviously apart from SATs, to sort of, as a sort of formal summative assessment?
We do. Actually, we test termly. With the amount of testing that goes on at the moment, we feel it's quite necessary and quite fair to give the children exposure. We went through quite a significant research project this year of our own accord, where we sampled NFER, GL, Maths No Problem, PIRA, PUMA, Rising Stars, and we kind of did sample tests to see the effectiveness of them and how they were working. So, you know, we were in a position to make the best choices and advise other schools as well as a teaching rights point of view. We've managed to find tests that are very, very effective and give us really good indicators as to pupil progress, development and standardised scores, but also align with our approaches at school. And then we've got some really high quality interventions or supplementary tests that help us to identify gaps or special educational need development areas, and we use that information alongside books, teacher assessment and moderation to come up with our final judgment.
Great. Is anybody else doing anything similar to Danny there, whereby you're either doing some kind of formal summative assessment either at the end of the year or even on a termly basis like Danny?
I'd like to know which particular resources...
Sorry, chipping in a sec. No, you carry on.
I would like to know from Danny which particular resources he found were very helpful for testing. He said he found one. Yes, what was the best, Danny?
Well, basically, I mean, we initially used GL, but they are revamping there, so I couldn't comment on their new publication. The NFER previously hadn't aligned, and their new ones are pretty effective from a theory point of view. But no, we've gone with a company called Maths No Problem. That's kind of been...
No Problem.
Yeah, that's been one of our... I guess it's a secret to success in a way, because they are very much heavily based on the Singaporean maths and Shanghai approach to maths, and so a lot of their papers are very reasoning based, problem solving based, and a lot of the questions that are now starting to come into this country are drawing heavily from their remit and their examples. So if the children are doing them regularly, then actually when it comes to a test, they don't really see any difference, and the kids in Key Stage 1 and 2 don't really see math papers as much of a test, to be honest, because they're getting lots of opportunity to do them throughout school.
Thanks so much.
The reading test we've chosen was PIRA. PIRA's very good for reading.
Of course.
PIRA, P-I-R-A. It's the Progress in Reading Assessment. It was originally by Hodder, but I think Rising Stars have brought it out now.
Yeah, Danny. So that's one of the ones that we use. We've used PIRA. My 4 children, small schools, actually have tests every term. PIRA, PUMA, Swiss spelling, Salford, because we're neurotic about making sure that our children are making enough progress. But PIRA,
how do
when
you
do the analysis, P-I-R-A. There's so many bolt-ons with that for the analysis of the questions.
Right.
You know, whatever it is that you've got a problem with, with, I don't know, some children might have a problem with decoding. You can pretty much do all sorts with it. I mean, I've got a data booklet. Bless my assessment manager, she'll do data till the cows come home. Every time I look at it, she'll go, underperforming boys, she can make it sing for me. So, but some of the others, generically, we're still using, and we're not sure if they're giving us the results that we want in order to inform.
Yeah.
Danny said,
I'm just gonna edge in a note of caution, because you're completely right. And from the research project we did, some of the materials that have been published they're just throwing them out onto the market so they can make money, but they're not effective at all. And you have to be really careful in choosing the right testing for your school, because some of it is absolutely pointless, and some of it doesn't really align very well to the curriculum and to what schools need to teach. So, you know, we're lucky that we've managed to go through the research project point of view, but you're completely correct that some of them are they're just money makers rather than actual.
They are. And you think, well, why have my children done this test? Because it's not telling me anything that I don't already know. You know, I can't do any diagnosis of, oh, that's an area we need to work on. Well, no, because we know, like you're working on that with your children. So that's just something that is a waste of money. But as you say, Pura was probably one of the best that we had.
Yeah. We've been assessing and reporting on data half-termly, although not necessarily testing that regularly lower down the school. Okay. So I agree with, I think it's what Danny said earlier about, you know, with the new testing regime, pupils need to be test ready. And I think some of our pupils, when we were sort of doing more teacher-assessed reporting, were struggling when they then came on to do formal reading tests in particular. And we had a sort of disconnect, if you like, where the teacher assessment would say they were working at a certain level, and then when they actually did a formal test, it dropped quite considerably. So we now do the reading tests throughout Key Stage 2, but we're not doing them half-termly, we're doing them termly.
Right.
We're moving on to using Rising Stars next year, having looked at a few different things. We use Maths No Problem as a teaching approach, which we've been sort of slowly introducing. So not all year groups were doing it. It started with Year 2. We've now got Year 2, 3, 4. Year 5 and 6 are using it as a resource, but not as their only teaching methodology. And I suppose the only note of caution I'd sound with their assessments is their assessments are very much tied in with their curriculum. So they're testing the things that you've taught. So therefore you can't just bring the tests in, if you like, as a standalone.
Yeah, as a standalone test. Yeah, interesting. Thank you. I'm going to come to Jamie, actually, because, Jamie, I've had a look at your comments in the chat pod there, and you said, well, so you do sort of end-of-year tests at Year 3, 4 and 5, but actually you don't really trust published tests. So could you just talk us through your thinking there, and you know, what you do use for the Years 3, 4 and 5 then in the way of end-of-year testing?
So we used the test-based test.
Yeah.
But there was no threshold level which was published with them. When the tests were done, they were used purely diagnostically, so formatively by the teachers to look for areas for gap analysis and filling gaps.
Yeah.
That's how they were used. We haven't reported anything to parents because they will announce their own thresholds for what the score for meeting 3, 4, 5 age-related attainment will be in light of the Key Stage 1 and 2 results. Well, that's my understanding anyway.
Yeah, okay. Good.
So you put in the chat pod about the issue about reliability and validity.
Yeah.
But Andy's comment there, I think, stands. And, you know, I've used other publishers in the past in my life in various schools, and invariably I've walked away unsatisfied because what the tests have said is what classes as a level. Invariably I've felt very uncomfortable about.
Okay, and so just coming then to Andy's comment there in the chat pod. So Andy, you know, you said there, is that the Rising Stars, the progress in, I think, is it the progress in maths tests and those ones that you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, in the early days, we were really concerned about how we were going to summatively assess children. So we did buy a selection of those tests. And after one use, I think we pretty much shelved them. Right.
And what was it? In what way did you feel that they were inaccurate? Just sorry, go on.
I think my experience of Rising Stars over the years has been that they just overinflate children's results.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. All right. Let me, on that note, put a couple of polls on screen. So I'm going to actually I'll leave that one on, and so find poll number 4. So There we go. So let us know what types of assessments you're using, either end of year, but I'm conscious that some of you have said end of term as well. So we'll sort of bring that into that category. So where I've said what assessments you use end of school year, that may well be at the end of terms as well, which seems to be quite common. And also, I'm going to put another poll, number 5, on, so there will be a few on screen at the moment. There we go. So number 5 is at the top there. So just what tools or features you look for in assessment at the end of the year. And these were just things that we could think of, but if there's anything that we haven't thought of there, let us know in the chat pod if there's something else that you would look for. And I'll give you a moment just to complete those polls. Okay. No, it's fine. Joe's very, very helpfully moving things around on the screen, but it's very strange because we've both got the same screens. So I think it's all good now. Great. Okay, let me share the results of those 3 polls with you. So it certainly seems like most of you are using commercial resources that you pay for. If you've not told us already which commercial resources you are using, then let us know in the chat pod if there is anything else that hasn't yet been mentioned. And a few of you also developing your own things. So Phil, Andy and Vera all saying that you're developing your own things as well. Let me just have a quick look in the chat pod because I can see you're typing away there. Jamie, so you're saying you would like more computer-based materials. Is that across the board then? You would like computer-based things for maths and other areas apart from SPAG, basically, maths and reading?
Well, I've used RM Maths. It's now in its incarnation as Easy Maths, and I've used that in the past and found that to be a very effective resource. Certainly moved pupils' learning on.
Yeah.
In terms of the testing element, what I have seen from testing, it doesn't cater for reading, which is a huge amount. Obviously, you can't do anything for writing. So what I have seen so far tends to be very much based on here's the answer, what's the answer, fill it in, rather than having the facility to cope with questions where you could get 1 mark, for example, for showing the correct method.
Yes. Yeah.
Rather than the 2 marks.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of the full breadth of the testing that goes on, I haven't seen anything that really comes close to it. There's lots of SPAG stuff out there, which is fine because it's what's the right answer. There you go.
Yeah.
And questions like, for example, with the multiplication test, what's the right answer? Computers are very good at that, but in terms of the nuances of reading, writing, and mathematical reasoning, they're not very good at all.
Okay, good. And it's obviously, just looking at poll 5 there, close curriculum links, you've all said that that's a priority, and that's not surprising, and sort of assessments that replicate the style and format of the stats as well is important. Let me have a look. I just want to ask actually about the importance of national standardisation and whether anybody currently uses any assessment resources that provide that facility, that's nationally standardised score. Has anybody got any experience of using resources that deliver on that? No.
Here do standardised scores, and Maths No Problem do standardised scores. They both align. GL do extensive reporting as well. Very, very extensive reporting, but you can pay for them to be externally marked. It's whether just that data is actually necessary, useful, or feed into your own progress tracking, really.
And those of you who have said that national standardisation is important, why is that important to you? Is it just so that you can get an idea of how your cohort is doing against, in comparison, to give you as a school an idea of how you're performing, or what makes it a particular priority?
What you don't want is, I think it was alluded to one or two people earlier, is using a test methodology that then gives you results that's completely out of sync with the national.
Yeah.
Because, as someone rightly said, some of the tests do give inflated scores or levels, and therefore you then hit with a nasty surprise, actually, when they come to do the official test. I suspect there'll be a plethora of new tests coming out now that we've had the first year of the new ones and commercial companies have had sight of them. So that there'll be a lot of tests coming out, so that schools, companies can sell to schools things that match up with the format of the national test. But it doesn't necessarily have to be standardised nationally in the sense of marked nationally, but we want the mark scheme or whatever that comes with it to line up as close as it can do to those national expectations.
Okay, good. Just having a look at what other people have selected. Anybody got anything else further to add there on top of what Phil just said? No. And just coming to Vera, so Vera, just looking at what you voted in the poll, matches the curriculum closely, yes, can be used across the whole school. But is it a particular priority for you as well, Vera, then, to have testing materials that really look like what the SATs look like, basically, in order to prepare children and for them to see and be ready, really, for the SATs assessments?
Well, I think it's an advantage in maths because of the calculation paper.
Yeah.
It's really good if earlier on in Key Stage 2, children are actually being given not just, for example, we were talking about today, children have a week on addition.
Yeah.
And it's really good to mix it up because they kind of learn one thing, then they learn something else. So, even early on, actually sort of giving them a kind of arithmetic test to improve their arithmetic speed. And I was thinking more of replicates the style and format of the SATs in respect that the questions are problem-solving questions, such as you get in a SATs test, including those.
Yeah.
We're using at the moment the Rising Star. It's like the test base used to be. There's a Rising Star maths test base.
Yeah.
Where the idea is the teachers think about what topic they've just used in maths and taught, and then they give the children questions that may not be at the end of the term, it may be at the end of the topic or at the end of the half term, but they choose the questions themselves, so they've actually given the children questions that they've actually covered, rather than giving the children a test and actually they haven't covered some of it.
Okay, good. Thank you, Vera. And I was just going to come to Danny, actually, because Danny, you said at the start, that you felt like your group of children were quite well prepared for the SATs, that obviously were more challenging this year, as a result of, good preparation and some of the resources that you'd been using. So any resources in particular that stand out to you that prepared children for the question types and the question styles that they then saw in the SATs?
Well, the Singapore maths approach to maths is just absolute dynamite, and we kind of embedded it 4 years ago. Even though we were doing very, very well in SATs then, we've kind of found our own feet and embedded it in teaching practice, which means that the children feeding up through school now have got significant experience reasoning, problem solving, applying knowledge and understanding. So when it came to doing the Key Stage 1 SATs tests early, seeing them do 3 quarters of 20, they just draw 4 circles, divide out the 20 and then circle 3 of them. It wasn't difficult for them. It's not an abstract concept. So the Maths No Problem textbooks and things have really helped us to kind of now solidify that practice and help get it in daily practice. We follow a very similar approach with grammar, and we've written our own grammar scheme of work in school, but it follows the approach of learning to drive the car before labelling the engine, which uses a lot of Alan Peat resources. So the children learn to apply the technical skill and then learn the technical language to describe the technical skill after, which is based on just brilliant EYFS practice, which everything is really these days, isn't it? The EYFS have got it all nailed for years. But, they see it, they recognise it, they learn it, they rehearse it, then they learn to apply it, then they learn to apply it in context, out of context, read it in text, out of text, and then they learn to call it a split diagram. We follow the same approach with grammar, and we've basically just uniformed it in whole school approaches and track it. And because it builds on and builds on, like our calculation policy and things like that, it's just feeding up, and the standards coming through each year group now are just getting stronger. So those have been massive elements for us.
Yeah, good.
Danny, can I just ask, when you brought Maths No Problem in, did you bring it in all at once, or did you introduce it into individual year groups, or how did you do it?
Well, because we're part of the textbook trials, so actually we have kind of had good exposure of both the My Pals and the Maths No Problem. Now, we didn't bring Maths No Problem in. We worked with some schools that had this approach, this in inverted commas, Singapore maths approach, and the textbooks and things didn't exist. So we had to build in the practice first, and then the Maths No Problem textbooks for us were much better than the My Pals, so they've superseded, and we've brought those in this year to help support what we're doing. I'd highly advise that if you were to kind of bring them in, you get the practice right first, because the textbooks and just following them aren't the answer on their own. It's what they kind of teach in terms of the lesson structure. So, for example, the anchor task and the focus task is that every lesson starts with a problem, and the children go off and differentiated through resource and support, or through knowledge. They basically learn to tackle the problem, reason, justify, and then the teacher moves into what's called a guided practice, and then they're showing new learning, and then they go off and apply, and then right at the end there's greater depth or blue sky thinking, which uses the Enrich or NCTM materials or other things test-based that we've got in school. So that fundamental change of the way we actually teach maths means that children, as soon as they step in, know that the very first thing they're going to do is reason and problem solve, and from reception upwards now, it's just a culture. So when we put a test in front of them and they've got a problem, and word problems used to be our biggest failing. It wasn't in the whole authority. Our children's they freaked out. They hated problem solving because they couldn't see the operations. They couldn't identify it. They never saw when division was in it. The language and reading it was always difficult and put them off. There were so many reasons. So for us to have it as a culture now, it's just that the children know to use the resources, know the steps they can take to get the answers, and know that if it's difficult, they go ahead and do it anyway. And I think one of the biggest positives for us is when the SATS tests were being conducted in Key Stage 2, and I've never seen such a culture of it, but when they had finished, the children were going back through the paper and finding a second or third way to prove that their answer was right. And in the past, we'd lost so many silly marks, and it really was hurting us. And children do make daft mistakes, but going back and having that resilience, that culture to prove and edit and show that mastery meant that they secured it, and they did, and the results kind of show that now.
Wow, fascinating. Certainly, if anybody else is doing anything similar to Danny as well, or has anything further to add, we'll have to move the conversation on, unfortunately. But just let us know in the chat pod and feedback on that, because some really interesting ideas, Danny, they're coming through, and it certainly sounds from what you've done and the culture really that you've developed in your school, and the ways of learning have really prepared the children for the new more challenging expectations.
It has, and I don't want to go on too much, but what I would say is that the practice kind of supersedes what's going on. So really, we feel quite confident because there are civil servants and politicians making decisions in this country, and actually, if you look at the work that's going on in Massachusetts, the questions that they ask in their tests, if you look at Singapore and the questions they ask in their tests, you're seeing more and more of them over here. So actually, we already know what future tests are going to look like, and they're in the resources and materials that we're using in school, because other countries have been using them for decades. Our country's just catching on and saying, oh, now it's a really nice trend and a good idea. So actually, there's a lot of very good resources out there that are helping for us to preempt. So that's a massive thing, which I sympathise a lot with schools, is chasing your tail and having to react to so many changes. But really, if you can just get practice in place and see ahead of the game, then it kind of allows you to cheat the system, I guess.
Great. Thank you, Danny. Really, really interesting comments. Fascinating stuff. I want to talk a little bit briefly about writing assessment, because that did come out you know, a little bit higher in the year 6 stats. So you can see it's still got the results there on screen. 74% of pupils met the expected standard in writing, and I know, Catherine, you had a few comments to make just about writing moderation. So perhaps let's come to you then, Catherine, just to sort of expand on your thoughts in terms of the writing standards, teacher assessment, moderation.
We were shocked by moderation, because we would have put our pupils probably nearer the 80% meeting, even with the new expected standard. And as others have said, we only got the guidance at the very last minute, really. So we were shocked when the moderators came from the LA and put us down so much. But they did explain. They said that it was the same with all the schools they were visiting, that everybody had over-assessed, they were putting them all down. They were seemed extremely harsh. Yeah. But they said that Cornwall LA would notice if, you know, all the schools that hadn't been moderated were a lot higher. So I don't know what's going to happen about that. But they said they were putting most schools down to about 30 or 40%. But then, because we get nationally, it's 74. But how many of those have actually had such a strict moderation, I do not know.
So, in terms of writing assessment, obviously it is teacher assessed.
Yeah, that's what makes it so difficult.
Do you think that there is a need amongst teachers and schools to have more support and guidance when it comes to writing assessment? For example, I don't know, thinking off the top of my head, things like more exemplar materials. I'm not sure, but do you see what I'm saying? Is there?
Yes, I do. I think I might. It sounds awful going back, but I think I would, in a way, just like to go back to them having one time when they write an essay and it's sent away, because at least we know everyone's treated the same. It's so subjective when it's teacher assessment.
I think also, I mean, there's a massive change this year, and as rightly been identified, the exemplars didn't come out until late February, early March. So teachers were quite well versed in using the previous assessment system and knowing what a 4C looked like, and a 4B and a 4A, and you know, where it pushed into a 5C. And obviously, most schools have good practice of moderating across the year group, moderating with other local schools, you know, bringing examples. And people have got that really clear. I think the difficulty this year was that because the exemplars were out so late, but also because the government kept using the language of saying that the new expectation is like a 4B. Well, it wasn't, you know. They kept saying 4B, but actually it looked more like 5C.
Yeah.
Interestingly, one of our members of staff went on training which was run by the DfE, and the DfE person who was there said they'd had an argument with the schools minister about this, constantly saying 4B when it wasn't 4B, and then he was saying 4B, and they were saying no, it's not a 4B, and in the end he said it's a new 4B. Which is possibly the most unhelpful thing anyone's ever said in terms of assessment. But, you know, and that's the problem as well, because that language has been out in the public domain. It's still on the DfE website in terms of the guidance. So, again, that managing of expectation hasn't been there to be able to say, well, actually, not like a 4B, it's a much raised standard, and therefore, if your child has fallen short of that, it isn't because they weren't able to do that old standard. It's completely new.
I mean, out of interest, is anybody using any kind of commercial resources for writing assessment, or to support teachers in writing assessment and doing their own teacher assessment, or is it purely based on teacher assessment? Is anybody using anything commercial to support them?
We only just used the interim guidance that was sent by the DfE. They haven't seen anything else.
Yeah, the key point indicator is really good from NAHT. But a lot of the materials that are out there are pretty, I mean, they're really drab. So we've just started writing our own materials in school to do whole school or cross-academy moderation. And we do from reception to 6 tasks. I mean, we've just done one which is a writing competition that a couple of girls in Year 5 found. We've done it as a whole school task, and we split it up between classes. We moderate, we come back, we share judgments, and that goes into the triangulation at the end of the year. So that for us is really effective practice. The only thing that's changed for us is that the interim frameworks, which had a big bold indicator saying do not teach to, were then really very binary, very black and white when it came to the moderation, which is very good in a way, because it kind of helps, because what you do is you make sure your evidence is there that shows they can do the criteria, and then you get on with teaching the creative stuff and enjoying writing again, so you don't have to kill them with grammar. I think if we started getting loads and loads of commercial resources that would just focus on that, it could make writing really grey again. I think that the less we do that, the better, because writing's already losing a lot of creativity as it is.
Interesting. Okay, so if you could just put in the chat pod, so if there are any materials, any support, any training, anything that either publishers or commercial organisations or anybody could provide to support you in writing assessment, let us know in the chat pod literally any suggestions that you may have, and it would be good to take that feedback and see what you have to say. So I'll give you a moment, just if you have got any thoughts there on writing assessment, to let us know. And in the meantime, I'm actually going to move the conversation on again. So we spent a long time talking on assessment. There's just so much to cover. But I do want to spend a bit of time this evening also talking about the curriculum. Of course, there's been such an emphasis on maths and literacy, which have, we've been talking mostly about maths and literacy this evening, and a lot of widespread criticism at secondary level about the ease back, pushing out the arts at secondary schools, and I'm just wondering if we're seeing a similar thing at primary level, whereby there's such a focus on maths and literacy, because obviously that's what we report on to the government and to Ofsted. Are the arts and the creative subjects and the sciences being squeezed out of the curriculum? Anybody got any initial thoughts on those wider areas of the curriculum as well?
No, I mean, if anything at my school, we're probably doing more on it. Because we realise that the children actually need stuff to write about. Right. They need those kind of experiences. They need things that intrinsically motivate them. So yeah, we're doing far more of the arts than I think we ever were.
That's really interesting. It's Andy speaking, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So would you say, are you adopting a more kind of cross-curricular approach then, where you are bringing, topics into literacy and into, across all areas of the curriculum really, to kind of give things more of a purpose?
Yeah, if anything, we're probably ditching, and it's probably quite dangerous as still a maintained school, but we're ditching large aspects of the national curriculum because I don't think it does anything for the children. I think large aspects of it are absolute tosh, and we're doing what we think the children need, rightly or wrongly.
It's really reassuring, Andy, to hear that still happens, and that it's nice to hear that you've got that approach.
It's kind of on my head, be it.
Yeah, brilliant.
I agree with Andy because certainly when I moved to start running one of these schools 3 years ago, I knew we'd have to drive up standards in English and Maths, but I was very conscious that we didn't want a dry, test-driven curriculum. So I actually appointed someone as creative lead for the school to kind of ensure that creativity came through the curriculum and to really sort of keep us all focused on that, because I also agree that actually if we're giving them better experiences and better things to write about, we're going to get better results anyway, and we'll get better pupil engagement and better attendance as well. And one of the things our pupils certainly say to us in terms of what they value about our school is the range of trips and experiences they get, the range of creative opportunities they get, the range of sporting opportunities they get. I mean, sport is massive for us. One of the first successes we had as a school was becoming city champions in hockey, which we've now maintained for the last 2 years, and we're also cricket champions for the city. And just the motivation that's given to some of our pupils and their belief to say, well, I can succeed, so therefore I'm going to succeed in my academic subjects as well as in sport and in the arts. I think that's massively important, and I think schools have fought very hard to keep that there. I think the thing that probably has been squeezed for us is science.
Right.
I think that because it remains one of the 3 core subjects that wasn't assessed, there is sometimes a drop-off, particularly in year 6, when you're sort of really pushing to improve those standards in English and maths. And it almost becomes a bit, doing a science week and doing science projects almost too standalone rather than threaded through in the way that English and maths can be. So that's something that we've sort of been conscious of to try and, to try to prevent that from happening.
Phil, I'm going to come back because actually I've got a few questions specifically on science and how much schools are spending on science in particular. So we'll come back to that. Before I do though, just to go back to maybe those more creative arts sort of subjects. And Catherine, although many of you are saying, that actually they're more of a focus now through cross-curricular teaching approaches, you're saying that they are actually still being squeezed out.
I think we do lots of cross-curricular, and actually we did a whole school production with lots of music in the last couple of weeks, with everybody there in a local theatre. But I still feel that it's not given the same status. And the children and then the parents do feel that, oh yes, it's a nice thing to do, but it's not what's reported on, it's not what's going to count in future. So I am sad about that. And it's just, things like music and the sport that's been mentioned, they do build up the skills that employers want, the teamwork and being able to get on other people. Those are the life skills, but they're just not measured when we have our business.
So, Catherine, what could change in, apart from obviously maybe not such so much emphasis on math and literacy, but what could you do, or what do you do as a school to ensure that you do try and keep that balance there, and that you do try to incorporate those creative subjects into your curriculum and give the children those opportunities?
Yes, well, we do make a big thing of whole school topics, which we all do, and children are able to share those in assemblies, and parents come to those. So we still do it, and as somebody else said, it does make an exciting thing to actually write about. So it is a vehicle for literacy. But there are ways of doing it, but we just got to hold on to those.
Yeah.
And with my results being so low yesterday, I thought perhaps we've done too much of the other. But it shouldn't be either or.
No, absolutely. Yeah, there should absolutely be a balance. So good. Okay. I want to come back to science actually, but if anybody has got anything further to add in terms of how they are managing to maintain those opportunities for creative learning in the arts sort of subjects, then let us know via the chat pod. I have got a poll though, sort of moving specifically onto science. I'm glad, Phil, that you brought that one up. Just as an approximate, this is a text poll, so just type in the bar there and submit your results. How much time does each class spend on science on the average week? And I know it might be quite difficult to generalise if it's different between different key stages or year groups, but just kind of give us an idea. And if it does vary, then as well, just let us know. I'll give you a moment there to just complete poll 8.
As I did the poll, I think I've managed to log myself out, so I'm just going to
You're back with us, aren't you, Vera?
I hope so. Yeah, I seem to be.
Yeah, good. A few. Lovely. So, Vera, you may have been...
or not?
Sorry?
my answer, or did it disappear?
To the poll.
Pressed enter and the whole thing went off the
No, we haven't got it, I'm afraid.
Okay, I'll do it again.
Is that where you were saying how much time you spend on science?
Yeah, I typed it in, I pressed enter and the whole lot just went.
No, we've lost it, I'm afraid.
No,
if you wouldn't mind telling
now,
us again.
It's fine.
Great. Okay. I'll share the results that we've got so far. It actually seems quite consistent. Sort of seems to be 1 to 2 hours-ish a week that you're spending on science. I'm going to pick up on Phil's point though, because Phil, you did say that science, can be squeezed out a little bit in year 6. Is that the case for other schools? Other head teachers as well find that in their schools, that science is maybe being squeezed out a little bit at the mercy of those SATs tests? Anybody?
Just me.
No, it just...
Well, I would just say that it needs really strong coordination. I think for us, just a couple of the guys who echo in the same sentence, is that every leader's been away on an event or training so far and come back and said, oh, now it's the most important thing ever. I think in the last 2 months we've had MFL is now an Ofsted focus, science is an Ofsted focus, obviously, PE, they all are, and we can't do it all. So actually we've gone down the more cross-curricular route, the more themed and thematic weeks route, so we have things like STEM week, etc., etc. But if you don't have a strong leader who's monitoring and tracking it, then it can quite quickly die off, and I think staff can be guilty of that. So I don't think really as schools we want to do it. I think staff can be quite keen to trim off the edges if it helps.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting because Phil, you said that you had you actually had a designated creative lead to ensure that it didn't tail off all those creative subjects. I mean, do you have something similar for science? A science coordinator who sort of looks across things across the whole school?
Because it's such a large school, we tend to have our subject leadership in teams, so there's one representative in each key stage. So that's the same for English and maths, science and the other subjects. So there is a team there. And actually, I may be probably underselling us a little bit in terms of science, because I think we do it. But it certainly felt last year, we were one of the schools that was asked to do the trial science SATs, and it seemed to be a one-off, and it wasn't about trialling a paper as in they were going to do science SATs in the future. It was more trying to get an idea of what the level of science understanding was across the country. So we never got any results from it, but we had, I think it was 6 randomly selected students that did it. And I think our Year 6 teachers felt that was the thing that our students were most prepared for, in comparison with obviously all the work they've been doing on reading and writing. But because it didn't reflect on us as a school, and it didn't reflect on the pupils in one sense, as in they weren't going to be graded on it or receive a grade on it, it wasn't so important. But it just made me reflect on how much science is being taught.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, I've got another poll for you. I'm going to hide these ones and clear up the screen a little bit. In fact, I might put another couple of polls on. So 10 and 11, I know. Right, so again, this is just general. Open that, there we go. So generally speaking, how confident do teachers feel delivering the science curriculum? And I know it will vary from teacher to teacher, so just sort of a general sense. And then also, any training or support that's put in place to develop skills, particularly in the area of science. We'd be interested to hear what's happening in that department as well. So give you a moment just to complete those polls. Danny, I can see that you've selected the external course. Could you maybe talk us through who went on that training and which training it was and how they found it?
Yeah, we have recently employed a STEM coordinator, so that's a responsibility in school, science, technology, engineering and maths, and she has been doing some really good work with the STEM Centre in York, and they've got some absolutely phenomenal resources, some really brilliant funded places for courses and professional development, so we get subsidies and bursaries for those. And they've been helping to do kind of outreach work with us as well. So the STEM Centre has been amazing. It's just quite far away.
Yes, yeah, okay. Just bear with me a moment. I'm just going to slightly divert your attention. So if you haven't noticed, there are a couple of additional questions, not necessarily related to what we're talking about right now, but they're questions that our clients listening in have also submitted. So just look in the chat pod. Joe has just put some extra questions. I think they're about assessment. So when you get the moment, I know it's a bit confusing because we're talking about science, but if you do get a moment, then do just respond to Joe's questions there in the chat pod as well. But coming back to what we're talking about in terms of science and the curriculum outside of maths and literacy, Jamie just saying it's not a school priority, so no training's being allocated for it, unfortunately. I mean, Jamie, in general, is training determined by the priorities that are on your school development plan, or how do you sort of work out what is and isn't a priority?
Well, the key driver is always going to be the school development plan, but that also ties to individual performance appraisal. So if my science coordinator is part of the performance appraisal, there'd been a conversation about furthering skills, then it may have been that for professional development, there may have been some opportunity for some sort of course possibly, or there's many different ways to have CPD. But she hasn't expressed any concerns about that, and it's ticking on okay. Could it be better? Yes. But in terms of embedding all the stuff with regard to English and maths, you know what, it's not a school priority this year.
No.
Nor will it be next year either.
Okay. And Phil, so you said, you know, your staff on the whole aren't so confident about delivering the science curriculum. So what sort of things do you do to sort of, I guess, develop that confidence and those skills, but also what sort of things might you be looking for in the way of, you know, accessible, affordable training or support that they can receive?
I think it's a relative term in terms of, you know, people tend to be more confident with the teaching English and maths because there's a lot more input, a lot more directed training on that, and a lot more resources available in one sense. So it's not that they're completely lacking in confidence on teaching science. But it's one of those areas a bit like PE and music sometimes, I think, for some of our staff, you know, they either love doing it or they don't.
Yeah.
So we have given staff making time over. We've had 2 staff who are part of this sort of wider team leading on science out doing specific training and then coming back and delivering that within the classroom. And I suppose it's also just auditing and ensuring we've got the correct resources for them to be able to teach the curriculum appropriately.
Okay, good. And so just a sort of general question out to everybody then. I mean, is there a need for further training in this area? Or, you know, if science in isolation isn't a key priority, is there a need for more training that kind of blend science in with other areas of the curriculum, maybe more core areas of the curriculum, which are a school priority? Anybody got any thoughts about that?
I think schools would be keen to see if they could work that way, but we get asked to do a lot of school-to-school support because as a teacher, the National College allocates their funding that way, but the diocese asks us to as well. And when you're going in to work with these schools that were identified as struggling before the SAT, then really science, as the others are saying, isn't a priority, it's the maths and the English. Obviously we don't want to neglect it, but if we can reinforce it through, say for example, English, then it will work. But following all the SAT sorts and the headlines and the announcements, it's going to be really such a massive priority for head teachers to get the core subjects right, because as been alluded to tonight, people can lose their jobs over it, or if they're missing floor standards, they'll be forced into academisation, and if they're academies, they'll be forced into a new academy. So I think for schools, it's getting the core standards, core subjects right, but if there's an ability to reinforce science through English and reinforce good grammar, good technical writing aspects through science and exploration, problem solving through science that also links to maths, then it's going to enhance everything anyway.
Good. Anybody got any further comments, questions there in terms of future needs when it comes to training, maybe for science? Maybe let's bring in, you know, other areas of the curriculum, you know, broader areas of the curriculum, creative subjects. Any further suggestions or comments from our head teachers tonight?
We're finding it very difficult in Cornwall to access any training now because the LA have stopped doing training because they've virtually folded. Right. And anything else, you know, if it's London or it's just too far for us to go from Cornwall.
So, Catherine, you know, are you more open to things like interactive webinars, for example, or you know, things online, basically?
Yes, that's the only way we can access it, really.
Yeah. Okay. Good. All right. I am going to actually move us away from discussing the curriculum in in that sense. And we're going to move on to the final section of the discussion tonight, I think, which is about budgets. We may well get on to talking a little bit about parental engagement, but if not, that may have to wait until until September to talk about that. But for now, let's focus on budgets. Have budgets been set for the forthcoming year? I mean, it seems to be that time of year. They have been.
Yes.
Okay. And how easy or difficult was it to go through that process of setting your budgets and deciding, how you were going to divvy up those pots of money, if you like?
Well, it's never totally easy, but it seemed the same this year as usual. I didn't find it harder than usual.
Okay.
I would say I did find it harder this year across both schools, because I think the larger employers' contribution towards pensions now, with quite a large staff, that's a big chunk of money.
Yeah.
That they're not available in the main budget.
Yeah.
And we've also got things like this contribution to apprentices. I don't know if anyone else has been hit by that. Because I think it depends how large an organisation you are, because we're part of a wider multi-academy trust. Then we have this levy of a certain percentage towards apprenticeships, which also has taken some money out of the main budget. So there was a bit more work to be done to kind of get things in line and set a positive budget.
Interesting that you say that, Phil. In fact, this question, we sort of developed it because I was talking to a chair of governors of a very big secondary school who was saying, that things like those pension contributions, for example, had a huge impact actually on, setting budgets, and, it's sort of things have ended up being squeezed out, basically. So interesting that you picked up on the size of school there as well. Okay. Anybody else? Maybe from a smaller school. I can't remember who it was. Maybe it was Maria.
Yeah. We're just in the process. We were in a community trust. We're just in the process of electing to become an academy ourselves, purely because of the funding. We've managed to secure a school that's not all that geographically close to us, but fairly generic in everything else. The only stumbling block we've got is the actual community trust don't really want us to come out, because we've been the outstanding school and the outstanding school, and obviously they'd like to keep us. So that's putting the process back. But from a point of view of our numbers and funding, we're electing to become a MAT.
Okay, interesting. Thank you, Maria. Again, just to sort of draw your eye, if you're not talking to me over the phone about budgets, then there are some questions about training in the chat pod, which Joe is just popping in there. So just scan your eyes there if you're not thinking about budgets. I do apologise. We do keep you very busy in these sessions, and you certainly do earn your money. Okay, coming back to budgets then. I mean, has anybody seen any big changes, I guess, to budget structure, or has anybody made any changes compared to in previous years? For example, have you, as an example, set an allocated budget for assessment because it seems to be such a big area of purchasing, or an allocated budget for online resources, or something else? Has anybody seen any big changes?
Our big changes, I mean, we lost enormously out in the last couple of budgets because of social deprivation calculations, and we're continuing to lose because Samuel's a relatively well-funded local authority because of its poverty and deprivation index.
Yeah.
So we are having to make adjustments that way. Some of the areas of our budget that have been retained are assessment and online resources. They're so well used in school and so effective, and the assessments are so valuable that actually we've protected those. The curriculum side of things are based on negotiations. If staff can bring action plans and justify the spends, we'll support them with it. But we don't just hand out the money, we want to see the evidence and the reasons why now.
Interesting. I mean, are the schools experiencing the same? Obviously assessment, online resources, big areas, but are we seeing that actually funding is potentially being diverted away from curriculum areas in order to sort of protect those other areas of you know, assessment, for example?
I think our biggest change next year in terms of budget is actually this year we've been able to have teacher-led interventions, and although they're really effective, going forward we won't be able to afford to have teacher-led interventions.
Right. So
they're more effective.
So I guess there, you know, you were having to pay, you know, for an additional member of staff, really. Yeah. And how are, you know, in addition to just cutting back on staff, general question out to everybody, how are you coping with these budget restraints? What are you doing? What areas are you cutting back on?
Support staff has been a huge one for us. It's just tough. It's the way it is. We had a really good conference today with a Singapore mastery teacher who's working with Master Napoleon called CB Hui, and she was talking about how there's one teacher to 40 pupils in their classrooms, and yet I had one NQT who's on the verge of resigning because she hasn't got support staff next year. But we've sat there and said, we haven't had support staff when we were teachers, and you're not guaranteed it in the future. I think there's got to be an adjustment from some teachers to see that things are going to strip back if the national formula changes, if the percentage and ratios for primary to secondary change, as they're all going to, we know they are, primary will lose out. And it's going to have to come at the cost of the main things, which are leadership, retention points, support staff, or possibly curriculum areas.
Interesting. Phil, coming to you, because I know you said, you know, being a large school, it has been a bit difficult setting those budgets. So were there any changes in the structure of your budgets, or did you have to cut back in particular areas?
Similar, we've lost some support staff, or we've got people come to the end of temporary contracts we haven't renewed in a couple of cases. Trying to maintain sort of, you know, high adult-child ratio, but in terms of teachers rather than support staff more where possible. So in some year groups we've had 4 teachers for 3 classes, particularly year 5 and 6, so that we can, you know, break those down to smaller groups for key teaching. We can't afford to do that quite so much this year, so we've lost 1 teaching post. We've not had to make anyone redundant, but they were going. Someone went and we didn't replace them. We're still investing heavily. We've put a lot of money into trips and experiences, and we work in an area where, you know, that those are not going to be affordable for our families. So we, just to give an example, at one school we put £37,000 into trips and and experiences last year, so that parents only had to pay a very minimal amount, but that we could still maintain them for all of our pupils. And we have maintained that, but we're having to look creatively at funding. We're not in an area where we get a lot of funding from a PTA, for example. You know, I have worked in schools where, you know, PTAs are contributing 20,000–30,000 a year. In fundraising, we're not in that kind of area, but we are looking at other ways of doing that, partnering up with other local companies. We've gone to, within the trust, we're using the same cleaning and catering companies across several schools, and that's led to some economies of scale, but also they put funding in for other areas when we talked to them about that. But, you know, I think that's going to be an ongoing fight for schools in terms of, you know, if they want to maintain staffing, they're going to have to be creative.
Yeah. And, I mean, what is the impact of, you know, obviously budgets are being squeezed, but what is the impact on resourcing as well, and the availability of, you know, or your flexibility really in terms of being able to allocate funding and money to buying resources, both for the maths and literacy curriculum, so things, you know, teaching and learning resources, but also for the wider curriculum as well. Are you having to make cutbacks in resourcing?
Yes, I'll just pitch in my 2 cents. We froze all curriculum budgets for the entirety of this term. We're moving to a new school and have had to go through a new build, so it's wiped us out really. So maths and English have been protected because as whole school approaches, they've got certain requirements, and we're happy to keep funding those. But other ones, like I said, have been completely frozen and they're now justified. So we're willing to spend, but it has to be linked to impact.
Yeah, yeah, okay. And what sort of things, when you are looking for, proven impact, what sort of things do you look for in terms of proving impact? Say if you were to, sorry, go on.
That it's going to support creativity, that it's going to have an impact on the timetable, the amount of hours covered, that it's going to support teachers in planning, preparation, resources, the opportunities the children get, that it's going to support their own professional development as a middle leader. It's quite a wide remit. It's not just impact in data. It's in what it brings to the school, but we just want our middle leaders to be aware that money is very tight, and we want to know every spend has been really well justified.
Yeah.
I sound very prudish when I say it, but unfortunately it's the situation we're in.
No, it's completely understandable, Danny. And so when you're thinking of getting a new resource, what sort of things convince you of all those things you just mentioned? So, for example, would you want to speak to user schools, seek testimonials? How are you going to be convinced of those things that you just mentioned?
I mean, as a teaching school, we know the benefit of having seen it work somewhere else. Collaboration and sharing is ultimate. If you've got a school that's best practice in something and you go and see it and you see in a real context how it's working, speak to head teachers, know the process they've gone through, then that's gold. It has to kind of have a link. I mean, we get very few coming to us now saying, oh, this is a really nice flyer. They have to kind of have samples and try the samples out in school, because that's something that's changed a lot. I think because of copyright and things, publishers are so wary of handing out things now, and if we don't see them, we're really just going to go, fine, we're not buying it. But if they're willing to give us a trial or allow us the chance to use it with the school, then we're going to go, listen, it's brilliant for us, let's go for it.
Yeah, great. Okay, I'm going to come to Andy. Andy, sorry, I just saw your typo in the chat pod.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. Freudian slip. So obviously, budgets are really tight, and you said there that CPD is, sort of suffering. What are you doing then to overcome that in terms of still providing opportunities for staff training and support? Are you just looking for, are you just getting less CPD, or are you looking for sort of cheaper and better value training? What are you doing?
Well, I mean, there's a few elements to that question. We were a school that were destined for special measures, and now we've got to good. I've been through huge staff turnover, so my CPD budget was over 20,000 a year, because I have to train new people year in, year out. Now we've stabilised, so I don't need to spend that, but even still, I can't afford to buy into PDA type agreements like I've had previously. The money just is not there.
Sorry, when you say it's PDA agreement, what's that?
Professional development allowances.
Okay.
That we've had with the local authority.
Right. Okay, so
they're gone.
Yeah.
I'm also having to lose support staff as well. Just hours that were on temporary contracts are gone. Because the increase in my budget this year was less than the additional costs.
Right.
And with a carry forward that I have no idea what it is because of county systems. We're in a vulnerable situation, but my role is increasing drastically.
Okay. Interesting stuff. Let me just have a look at what's happening and what you're commenting on in the chat pod. And Joe just saying there, budget cuts are really affecting a wide range of areas. Absolutely. CPD, resourcing, staffing, ICT, an awful, it's obviously having an impact across the board. I think that, let me just check my questions. I just want to make sure we cover everything in this evening session. I think what we'll do, that actually pretty much draws things to a close this evening, but do take this opportunity. Our publishers are really listening in to hear everything that you have to say, and if there's anything that you think would be helpful in the way of publisher resources or training or support, any final thoughts, ideas, recommendations, suggestions that you can give to our clients listening in, it would be really, really helpful, and really just reflecting on all of the areas that we've discussed tonight. So all the way from, talking about assessment and SATs, reception baseline, summative kind of end of term, end of year assessments, and then the wider curriculum as well, and thinking about how all of those needs can be met with this ever-diminishing budget that you're experiencing. If you do have any final thoughts, then do let us know via the chat, because it's all really, really valid, really useful feedback. But I think that's pretty much everything from me, other than just to say a very big thank you on behalf of School Zone and all of our clients listening in. We really do appreciate your all of your feedback and your individual experiences. Just keep an eye on the chat pod. There may be any final questions that are submitted from our clients, but I think that's pretty much everything. So thank you all, and have a lovely evening, and hopefully we'll speak to you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.